Under the sweltering Texas sun, traffic on Highway 83 slowed to a crawl, but not because of an accident. Something much smaller, much wilder, had brought cars to a halt. A tiny bobcat kitten, desperate and determined, blocked the road, refusing to retreat. Officer Sarah Winters had seen her share of strange calls, but nothing quite like this. As she approached the trembling creature, she realized it wasn't just lost or injured. It was trying to tell them something. And when she saw the glint of metal strapped to its leg, she knew, somewhere beyond the horizon, a mystery was waiting for her. What could a wild bobcat possibly be leading them toward? And why did it seem to be waiting for help? What started as a routine highway patrol would soon uncover a life or death mystery that no one saw coming. Before we start, hit the like button, make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss any new stories. The summer sun beat down on Highway 883 in the West Texas countryside, creating shimmering mirages on the asphalt that stretched as far as the eye could see. Traffic moved steadily, the usual flow of trucks and cars heading north toward Abilene or south to San Angelo, their passengers oblivious to the drama unfolding on the roadside. Officer Sarah Winters adjusted her Stetson against the glare, squinting at the dispatch notes on her cruiser screen. At 34, she'd been with the Texas Department of Public Safety for 11 years, and rarely did wildlife calls warrant immediate attention. But something about this one felt different. Reports of a small, aggressive animal disrupting traffic wasn't something she could ignore. Dispatch. This is Unit 247 responding to the wildlife incident at Highway 83, mile marker 143. ETA 3 minutes, she reported, easing off the accelerator as she approached the scene. Roger that, Officer Winters. Be advised. We've had additional calls. Motorists reporting what appears to be a juvenile bobcat displaying unusual behavior. Sarah's interest spiked. In her experience, animals typically fled from highways, not toward them. Something wasn't right. She spotted the commotion before she reached the mile marker. A cluster of vehicles pulled onto the shoulder, drivers standing outside their cars, pointing and snapping photos with their phones. With practiced efficiency, Sarah pulled up behind the last vehicle, lights flashing to alert oncoming traffic. As she stepped out of her cruiser, the hot Texas air hit her like a physical force. She adjusted her utility belt and approached a middle-aged man in a faded Dallas Cowboys t-shirt who appeared to be directing others to stay back. "Afternoon?" "Sir," Officer Sarah Winters called out. "DPS. Can you tell me what's going on?" The man wiped sweat from his brow. "Ma'am, there's a baby bobcat over yonder," he said, pointing toward the median. "Been trying to cross for about 20 minutes now. Runs out, then retreats. Almost caused a pileup when a semi braked hard to avoid it." Sarah nodded, her trained eyes scanning the area. "Anyone try to approach it?" "No, ma'am. Wild animal and all. Plus ... He hesitated. "Seems distressed, like it's trying to get our attention or something. Never seen nothing like it." "I just spoke with the ranger station at Fortress Ridge State Park. They've had a missing hiker since yesterday. Robert Whitley, 42, experienced outdoorsman. He checked in for a 3-day solo hike but missed his scheduled check-in last night." Sarah's police instincts kicked in. "And the marker number matches?" "RW, his initials, and 7734 was his campsite registration." They both looked at the bobcat, which was still waiting, occasionally making that same urgent sound. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah said. "How would a bobcat end up with a hiker's marker?" Stephen's expression turned thoughtful. "There might be an explanation. Let me check something." Stephen pulled out his tablet and tapped through several screens. "Here, Ranger records show that Robert Whitley is a wildlife rehabilitator from Austin, specializes in big cats. Sarah looked at the bobcat with new understanding. So, this could be his rescue? Maybe he was tracking it as part of a rehabilitation program? It's possible, Stephen admitted. But if that's the case, why is the bobcat here and Rob isn't? The implication hung between them. The bobcat made another sound, more insistent this time, and took several more steps toward the forest. Sarah made a decision. I'm going to follow it. If there's any chance it knows where this hiker is, I'm coming with you. Stephen interrupted. If Robert is injured, we might need medical supplies. He hurried back to his truck and returned with a backpack, basic first aid, water, and emergency rations. Standard search and rescue kit. Sarah radioed dispatch to update them. We've got a potential missing persons case connected to the wildlife incident. Dr. Mitchell and I are going to investigate, requesting additional units and search and rescue on standby. Copy that, Officer Winters. Be advised, nearest backup is 30 minutes out. Search and rescue has been notified but will stage until you confirm. Understood. We'll proceed with caution and maintain radio contact. The bobcat, seeming to sense their decision, turned and trotted toward the tree line, looking back periodically to ensure they were following. Never thought I'd be following a bobcat into the woods, Stephen muttered. Nature has a way of surprising us, Sarah muttered as they crossed the highway, directing bystanders to clear the area. Especially when humans get involved, Stephen replied. As they entered the forest, the temperature dropped noticeably under the canopy of oak and juniper trees. The bobcat stayed about 50 feet ahead, visible enough to follow but maintaining its distance. It's staying on a clear path, Stephen observed. That's another sign this isn't typical behavior. Wild bobcats, even partially rehabilitated ones, would use more cover. Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the ground. There, she pointed. Boot prints, recent ones. Stephen knelt to examine them. Good eye, these are fresh. Maybe a day old, Stephen said, examining the prints. Men's hiking boot, probably size 11 or 12. They continued following the bobcat, which maintained its steady pace. About a mile into the forest, they came across a clearing where the undergrowth had been disturbed. Broken branches, flattened grass, and scattered personal items. A water bottle, a torn backpack strap, and, most concerning, spots of what appeared to be dried blood on several leaves. Someone passed through here in a hurry, Sarah said, her hand moving instinctively to her sidearm. Or fell, Stephen added, pointing to a steep drop-off at the edge of the clearing that hadn't been immediately visible. The bobcat had stopped at this point, pacing anxiously and making that same urgent sound. The bobcat approached the edge of the drop-off, then looked back at them expectantly. Sarah and Stephen exchanged glances before carefully making their way to the edge. Below was a ravine, about 30 feet deep, with a small stream running along its bottom, and there, partially concealed by a fallen tree, was a human form. Robert, Stephen called out. Robert Whitley? The figure moved slightly, raising an arm in what might have been a wave. He's alive, Sarah said with relief. Then, into her radio, dispatch, we've located the missing hiker. Ravine approximately 1 mile east of Highway 83, at mile marker 143. Subject is alive but injured. Requesting immediate medical evacuation. Copy that, Officer Winters. Search and rescue is mobilizing. ETA 45 minutes to your location. Let's assess the ravine. It's not too steep. We can make it down there, Sarah said. I'll go first. I've got the medical supplies, Stephen offered. They carefully picked their way down the slope, using trees and rocks for support. The bobcat surprised them by finding its own path down, moving with the natural agility of its species. When they reached the bottom, they found Robert Whitley conscious but clearly in distress. His leg was pinned under the fallen tree, and his face was pale from exposure and dehydration. But as the bobcat approached, a weak smile crossed his face. "Nova," he whispered. "Good girl." The bobcat, Nova, approached cautiously and nuzzled against Robert's outstretched hand. Stephen immediately set to work examining Robert while Sarah provided water and radioed in more detailed information about his condition. Compound fracture of the right tibia, possible concussion, dehydration, Stephen reported, but stable. Sarah leaned closer. "Robert, can you tell us what happened?" Robert took a shaky breath. "I was tracking Nova. She's part of my rehabilitation program, ready for her final wilderness assessment before release." He paused, wincing in pain. "We were doing well until yesterday evening. There was a sudden storm. Lightning struck a tree nearby. Nova bolted, which is natural, but the same lightning weakened this tree." He gestured weakly to his trapped leg. "I was following her trail. When it fell, I couldn't reach my emergency beacon," Robert explained, his voice strained. "So I attached my location marker to Nova's tracking harness and told her to find help." Sarah and Stephen exchanged astonished looks. "You trained a bobcat to find help?" Sarah asked incredulously. Robert managed a small laugh that turned into a grimace. "Not exactly. Nova was found as a very young kitten, raised around humans before I got her. Part of her rehabilitation was learning that roads mean humans. When she's frightened, she still associates roads with safety." His voice filled with pride. "I wasn't sure it would work, but I hoped she'd go to the road and someone would notice her tag." Nova had settled next to Robert, her spotted body pressed against his side, watching the newcomers with cautious eyes. "That's incredible," Stephen said, securing the splint around Robert's leg with practiced hands. "You essentially improvised animal-assisted search and rescue." "I had faith in her," Robert replied simply, his eyes locked on Nova even through his pain. The next hour unfolded in a whirlwind of coordinated effort. The search and rescue team arrived with proper medical equipment and a specialized ravine stretcher. As they carefully extracted Robert's leg from beneath the fallen tree, Nova maintained a quiet vigil, close enough to monitor, but never interfering with the human responders. Sarah watched, captivated by this unprecedented intersection of human and wild. Every instinct she'd learned about predator behavior was being rewritten before her eyes. As the rescue team prepared to move Robert, his weak voice cut through the commotion. "Nova, please. Someone needs to. She's not ready for full release yet." Stephen didn't hesitate. "I'll take personal responsibility for her," he declared, locking eyes with both Robert and the wary bobcat. "Wildlife rehab is part of my jurisdiction. She'll be safe until you're back on your feet." "Robert, you have my word." Relief washed over Robert's ashen face as the rescue team lifted his stretcher. "Thank you," he whispered, fighting to stay conscious. "Her carrier, supplies, at my campsite, Fortress Ridge, Site 7734. "We'll find it," Stephen assured, pressing a steadying hand to Robert's shoulder just before the team began their ascent. Nova darted forward with a panicked chirp, her claws scrabbling against loose rocks as she tried to follow. Sarah, acting on pure instinct, dropped to one knee, bringing herself eye level with the distraught bobcat. "It's okay, girl," she murmured, holding out a non-threatening palm. "He's going to be all right. And you? You did real good." Nova stilled, her ribcage heaving. Those uncanny golden eyes held Sarah's gaze with an intelligence that defied nature, understanding, gratitude, and wildness swirling together. Epilogue. 3 weeks later. The story of Robert Whitley and Nova, the rescue bobcat, had burned through local headlines. "Man's life saved by rehab bobcat," before national outlets pounced on the heartwarming twist. A wildlife rehabilitator saved by the very creature he'd been preparing for wild release, which was why Sarah now found herself idling outside the Austin Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, her patrol cruiser collecting dust in the parking lot. She hadn't stopped thinking about that look in Nova's eyes, or the way Robert's fingers had trembled when he thanked them. The automatic doors hissed open. When her sergeant suggested she do a follow-up as part of their community outreach program, Sarah had volunteered before he finished the sentence. The rehabilitation center sprawled across 20 acres outside Austin, modern facilities nestled among naturalistic enclosures designed to mimic Texas wilderness. A freckled volunteer guided Sarah to a sunlit therapy room where Robert Whitley held court in a wheelchair, his casted leg elevated on a padded stool. "Officer Winters," Robert beamed, extending a hand that no longer trembled. "It's good to finally meet you properly. Last time I was a bit indisposed."
Sarah clasped his hand with a laugh. "Call me Sarah, please. And for the record, you handled a compound fracture better than most people handle paper cuts. Adrenaline's a hell of a drug." Robert chuckled, gesturing to the window where Nova sunbathed in an outdoor enclosure. But knowing Nova pulled through, that was better than morphine. "How is she?" Sarah asked. Robert's face brightened like a sunrise. "Why don't you see for yourself? We're about to do her afternoon session." He wheeled toward an expansive enclosure where Dr. Mitchell stood waiting, clipboard in hand. Sarah's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Stephen's been driving down twice a week to work with Nova," Robert explained, catching her reaction. "Says he's never encountered anything like her. He's documenting her rehabilitation for a peer-reviewed study." "Sarah," Stephen called, his usual professional reserve giving way to visible enthusiasm. "Perfect timing. You're about to see something remarkable." Inside the enclosure, Nova moved with liquid grace between training platforms. Her once scrawny frame had filled out, muscles rippling beneath that distinctive spotted coat. Every leap, every calculated pause, spoke of a creature perfectly balanced between wild instinct and hard-won trust. Sarah barely recognized the sleek predator before her. The kitten-like proportions she remembered had transformed into the powerful lines of an adolescent bobcat. "She's getting big," Sarah observed, watching Nova stretch in a sunbeam. "They grow fast at this stage," Robert said, pride warming his voice. "And she's thriving. This whole experience," he shook his head in wonder, "it hasn't slowed her rehabilitation. If anything, we're gaining revolutionary insights into bobcat cognition." Stephen unlatched a reinforced gate, ushering them into a secure observation area. Nova's head snapped up instantly. To everyone's surprise, she padded straight toward Sarah, her golden eyes locked on the officer with unnerving focus. "She remembers you," Robert breathed, astonished. "Is that unusual?" Sarah held perfectly still as Nova circled her boots, sniffing intently. "Extremely." Stephen's pen hovered over his clipboard. "Wild bobcats see humans as interchangeable threats, unless they've had years of contact. For Nova to recognize you specifically after just one encounter," he met Sarah's gaze. "You're witnessing something unprecedented." Sarah felt an electric tingle along her spine as Nova studied her with those laser-focused golden eyes. "What happens to her now?" she asked, unconsciously holding her breath. Robert exchanged a weighted glance with Stephen. "That's become the million-dollar question," he admitted, rubbing his chin. "Nova's rewriting our playbook. Her ability to toggle between wild instincts and human engagement, unprecedented in documented bobcat behavior. Stephen stepped forward, his boots crunching on the enclosure's gravel. Standard protocol demands minimal human interaction before release. He gestured to Nova, who was now delicately sniffing Sarah's duty belt. But this cat? She's demonstrated problem solving skills rivaling primates. That changes the ethical calculus. A charged silence fell as Nova butted her head gently against Sarah's knee, a gesture more befitting a house cat than a wild predator. Several researchers, myself included, are proposing an alternative, Robert said, maneuvering his wheelchair alongside the enclosure's observation glass. We're pioneering a wildlife ambassador program for animals who exist in that rare space between wild and domesticated. Nova chose that moment to solve a puzzle box with a deliberate swipe of her paw, extracting a meat reward as cameras recorded her technique. Let me guess, Sarah said, watching the bobcat's efficient movements. Nova would be your first ambassador. The ideal candidate, Stephen interjected, tapping his tablet to show neurological scans, wild enough to represent her species authentically, but with these unique cross species social capacities. And after her heroic role in your rescue, he nodded toward the enclosure, where Nova was now demonstrating how she'd learned to open latches. Public engagement would be unprecedented. Sarah crossed her arms, a new realization dawning. This wasn't just a lucky rescue, was it? You're documenting how she thinks. Robert met her gaze, unflinching, every minute since you found her on that highway. You really did train her, Sarah realized aloud. Robert shook his head, sunlight glinting off his wheelchair's frame. Not like you train a dog. You can't command a bobcat, only work with their instincts. He gestured to Nova, who was now meticulously cleaning her paws after solving the puzzle. Roads mean humans. Humans mean help when distressed. The tracking device? He tapped his own thigh where Nova's harness had been. That meant me. A quiet chuckle escaped him. Truthfully, I had no idea if it would work. It was a Hail Mary pass with my line. Well, it saved your life, Sarah said, watching Nova stretch like a house cat in a sunbeam. And changed hers, Robert added softly. The publicity from the rescue secured funding for our ambassador program for 3 years. He wheeled toward a set of architectural blueprints unfurled on a nearby table. We're breaking ground next month on a state-of-the-art facility where visitors will learn about Texas wildlife through animals who, like Nova, bridge worlds. Nova, who can't be fully released, Robert concluded, watching the bobcat bat at a feather toy with lethal precision. Speaking of publicity, Stephen interjected, checking his phone. The governor's office called this morning. They want to honor you both at the State Conservation Gala next month. Robert flushed. I told them Nova deserves the award, not me. Their exact response? Stephen smirked. We don't have a protocol for giving medals to bobcats. He pocketed his phone. Though they are putting her face on the new wildlife conservation license plates. So there's that. Sarah's smile bloomed as she remembered the trembling wildcat blocking Highway 83, the glint of that tracking device. That desperate creature had not only saved a life, but now stood to rewrite the narrative of human-wildlife coexistence. Who could have imagined, she murmured, that one small bobcat would change how Texas sees its wild heart? As if sensing Sarah's reflection, Nova padded to the fence, her paws silent on the sun-warmed concrete. She made a soft pert sound, something between a purr and a chirp, that felt inexplicably like recognition. "Would you like to feed her?" Robert offered, holding out a pair of stainless steel tongs with a raw quail leg clamped at the end. Sarah hesitated, her mind flashing to the razor-sharp claws that had shredded that puzzle box, before accepting the tool. Under Robert's quiet guidance, slow movements, let her come to you. She extended the offering through the reinforced feeding port. Nova took the meat with surgeon-like precision, her needle-like canines never brushing the metal. Then, in a move that stunned Sarah, the bobcat sat squarely on her haunches to eat, as deliberately as a house cat with a favorite treat, all while maintaining eye contact. "I never imagined," Sarah breathed, "I'd be sharing a meal with a wild predator." Robert's wheelchair creaked as he leaned forward. "She's rewriting our definitions. Wild isn't a line in the sand. It's a spectrum. And Nova?" He nodded to where she was now licking her whiskers. "She's the perfect ambassador to prove it. Wildness exists on a spectrum," Robert explained, gesturing to where Nova was demonstrating natural hunting behaviors for a group of enthralled schoolchildren. "Nova's teaching us that the line between wild and tame isn't a wall. It's a river, with currents we're just beginning to map." 6 months later, Sarah stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Texas Wildlife Ambassador Center. Though her police badge gleamed on her uniform, the department had assigned her as their official liaison. She knew her presence was personal. She needed to witness how Nova's legacy had taken shape. The facility took her breath away. Sprawling habitats mimicked Texas ecosystems down to the native grasses, while elevated walkways let visitors observe without intrusion. Interactive displays told each ambassador's story. A red-tailed hawk with a wing injury too severe for flight. A gray fox kit raised by humans after a wildfire. And Nova, her enclosure featuring a replica of the fallen tree from her rescue, alongside a plaque detailing how her extraordinary intelligence redefined wildlife rehabilitation. "Exceptional cognitive abilities," Sarah read aloud, tracing the words beneath Nova's photo. The bobcat in question lounged on her favorite platform, watching the crowd with the same keen eyes that had once pleaded for help on Highway 83. Nova's habitat anchored the facility, a masterclass in conservation design. Towering limestone formations, drought-resistant junipers, and a recirculating stream recreated hill country terrain, while one-way glass allowed researchers to observe without intrusion. The bobcat herself held court on a sunlit ledge, tail flicking as she monitored visitors through the educational plexiglass. Robert, now moving without his wheelchair, commanded the ribbon-cutting ceremony. When his retelling reached Sarah's role, he extended a hand toward her in the crowd. Officer Winters saw what most would overlook: that intelligence wears many coats. The microphone caught the rasp in his voice. She didn't see a wild animal that day on Highway 83. She saw a person in need.
Heat prickled Sarah's cheeks as she joined him at the podium, but Nova's gaze, locked on them from her enclosure, steadied her. Later, in the researcher's observation nook, Sarah watched the bobcat stretch across her rocky perch. "She's adjusted to fame better than I have," Sarah joked, noting how Nova ignored the phone cameras pressed against her habitat's glass. Robert adjusted a monitor showing Nova's biometrics. "Celebrity is fleeting, but this?" He nodded to where a group of children gasped as Nova demonstrated her puzzle-solving skills. She's making wilderness personal for a generation that may never see a bobcat in the wild. People who see her, who hear her story, they're donating to conservation efforts, supporting habitat preservation, Robert said, his voice thick with quiet pride. One bobcat has done more for Texas wildlife in 6 months than a decade of awareness campaigns. Sarah watched as Nova stretched, her powerful shoulders rolling with feline grace. Those keen eyes swept across the crowd before pausing, just for a heartbeat, on Sarah. A flicker of something. Recognition? Gratitude? Do you ever wonder what she's thinking? Sarah asked. Robert's smile deepened the sun-worn creases around his eyes. Every day. But I've learned to respect the mystery. Nova reminds us animals aren't simplified humans. They're entire universes of complexity, just different from ours. As the setting sun stretched long shadows across the center, Sarah marveled at the ripple effect of that one roadside encounter. How a routine call about traffic disruption had realigned lives. Robert's, Nova's, her own, and now thousands of visitors who'd walk away seeing wilderness through new eyes. 11 years on the force, she mused, and this is the only case that rewrote my definition of intelligence. Robert's chuckle was warm in the gathering dusk. Let's hope it stays that way. Once in a lifetime is enough for me. In companionable silence they observed Nova, the bobcat who'd once frantically sought human help, now holding court with effortless poise. Her very presence a living lesson, that the line between wild and tame was never a barrier, but a conversation. As the last visitors trickled out, Nova rose and padded to the observation glass where Sarah stood. For one suspended moment, gold eyes met human ones, that same electric connection humming between them, as palpable as it had been on Highway 83. Sarah didn't need words to understand. This wasn't an ending. It was the first page of a wilder, wiser future.